Uh, I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
Are negative Google reviews hurting your business? Don't let unfair feedback cost you customers. At Webamax, we specialize in removing false, misleading, and damaging reviews so your online reputation stays strong. Our expert team works quickly and legally to clean up your digital presence, helping you rebuild trust. Visit us on the web at www.gowebamax.com. That's GOWEBIMAX.com, or text us for a free quote at 856-840-8343. Don't let bad reviews define you. Get immediate help from Webamax.
The wrongs we must right. The fights we must win. The future we must secure together for our nation. This is what's in front of us. This determines what's next for all of us. We are Marines. We were made for this.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
Come meet me at the Musial with Alan and Daniel. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. Everyone come gather round, listen to your favorite sound. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We'll talk the games and all the rest, about the team that we love best. We'll talk about the Cardinals all night long. We're gonna talk about the Cardinals all night long.
Good evening and welcome into another edition of Meet Me at Musial. I'm your host, Daniel Shoptaw at C70. Alan Medlock's still out and about with his AD duties, but we've brought in, I think it's too obvious to say a worthy guest, but we've brought in Lynn Worthy from the Post-Dispatch, the newest columnist there. And Lynn, have you heard every different type of variation on your last name?
I don't know if I've heard all of them, but at this point, they just sort of I'm not sure if it even registers anymore.
Yeah, no, nobody. You don't have to worry about anybody thinking they're cute. You just kind of ignore it and go on, and that's understandable. So you are this first time you've been on, and you're kind of, I don't want to say the new kid on the block. You've been in St. Louis for a little while now, but there may be some people that are listening that haven't known your background. So why don't you give us the thumbnail sketch of how Lynn Worthy got to St. Louis?
Yeah, so this is actually I always have to stop and catch myself on the math. This is the sixth newspaper that I've worked at. So I worked before here. I was directly before here. I was in Kansas City, Salt Lake City. I was in Allentown, Pennsylvania, Binghamton, New York, and Lowell, Massachusetts. So yeah, that was so six. This is the sixth newspaper, and I actually grew up in Massachusetts. So the paper in Lowell was basically my hometown paper. So, but yeah, I've been, like I said, so sixth newspaper, and I want to say this is now 19 years doing full time, and a little bit of time before that doing interning and part time and stringing and that sort of stuff. But yeah, so I haven't gotten quite West Coast, at least not as a home base. I've traveled out there, but
Yeah.
so I've worked in, I guess, three different time zones and um, covered a bunch of different sports. From when I was in Kansas City, I was covering the Royals right before I came here. But when I originally
Mhm.
got hired out there, it was actually for the Chiefs, and the season that I covered, it was the first season of a young quarterback by the name of Mahomes that some
Uh,
people have heard of.
a couple have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I've traveled around a little bit, covered some different things, and yeah, as of January, yeah, early January, I took on the columnist role here with Ben Frederickson leaving the paper.
Yeah. Was there any trepidation when you left the Northeast to start, kind of seeing the country, as it were?
Um, I guess the normal stuff where it's like, especially since the first paper was where I grew up. So I mean, I was
Hmm.
literally covering a lot of teams that, I mean, like my old high school, I might catch every now and then. I was, schools that I'd grown up,
Hmm.
going to watch games or playing against, or coaches that had coached against me, or coaches that I had as coaches. And then by the end, there was even some people that friends of mine who had started getting into the coaching
Mm, yeah.
ranks. So it was it was and my parents and sister still live up that way, so there's a lot of people still around, and it was comfortable. So
Hmm.
leaving home, you got that leaving home, you know that little bit of I guess anxiety, or whatever you want to call it. But um at the same time, I knew when the first paper I went to was Binghamton and New York, and it wasn't all that far away. I mean, it was a ride. It wasn't like you're going back
Hmm.
and forth on weekends or anything like that. But it was it wasn't that far away. But it also was a decision that was made to advance in my career. So um, I mean, there's probably some days where I might have had some second thoughts, but overall, nothing
Yeah.
that set me, screaming home.
No, no, and everything has worked out pretty well so far, so, you can't complain, and I guess, I mean, if you get into sports journalism and wanting to advance, you're gonna have to go to some of the bigger cities. That's part of the deal, right? You can't, I mean, I guess for you, maybe Boston would have been the closest, but other than that, you're gonna have to go a ways to cover the top teams.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just even I didn't like I said, I started in Lowell. I didn't
Mhm.
think that was really in the cards for me, because I figured I was going to have to move somewhere sort of random to get
Right.
started. And
Mhm.
so I was lucky enough to start my hometown paper. As a matter of fact, the first sports editor I had visited him and spoke to him about just my interest in journalism, I think when I was in high school. And so,
Mhm.
and then he ended up being, however many years later that was, my first sports editor when I actually started full time. So, like,
Yeah.
I didn't expect that to unfold that way.
No, no, but it helped a little bit too, I'm sure, so, like you said, stop before this was Kansas City. Um, what drew you across the state?
Well, the chance to cover the Cardinals was, that was the initial job
Mhm.
that I took, and just the passion, the history, um, the attention that's paid, um, the coverage that's devoted to the Cardinals. I mean, it was. I mean, particularly in the recent years, I think I've made the comparison where the Chiefs have become such a big phenomenon in Kansas City
Mhm.
and sort of take up so much of the oxygen in the room. It's like, well, that's been the Cardinals for I don't know how long in St. Louis. Or I also, I think back people I grew up with back home, I use the comparison of, like, in Boston is a sports crazy area,
Mhm.
but you also have a lot of teams there. And I said, well, imagine, how crazy people are about the Red Sox in Boston, but you don't have football and basketball. You just have,
Yeah.
baseball and hockey. That's sort of the way I try to explain it to some people too. So um, that's a lot of the draw when I first, started having conversations about coming to St. Louis.
You've covered a lot of sports. You've covered, again, probably just about all of the especially the major ones. Is baseball the one that you enjoy covering the most?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, early on in my career, the one that I covered the most for a period was basketball, and
Mm,
then it sort of changed as I've moved to different places. And funny enough, it was baseball. I think is still the only thing that I covered in every place that I've worked.
okay.
Um, I think that's still correct because I either had minor league baseball or Major League
Mm,
Baseball everywhere I'd been, um, and covered it on a fairly regular basis, if not a regular basis, everywhere I'd been. Um, which is why when I made the switch to baseball in Kansas City, it was sort of like it was a natural thing. It was, you know, there were some, to remember the exact circumstances, but I think our Royals writer had just left. They didn't fill the spot because of the, newspaper
mhm.
um, cuts and whatnot. And so then it was like the spot was open for a while, and they were trying to decide what they were going to do and if they're going to be able to add somebody from outside. And that wasn't the case. So I think before they actually talked to me about doing it, there was a couple of us who had more or less decided that like that's what made sense. It was
Yeah. Mhm.
considering my background and the opening and how many people we had sort of doing chief stuff at the time, and it was like, well, yeah, that made sense. And then even yeah, like I said, at that point in time, it's like, well, yeah, I'd cover baseball, everywhere I'd been at some level to that point. So yeah, just sliding over there, seemed like a fit.
Yeah. And it's different than, I guess, any other sport just because of the daily grind of it. I mean, basketball's close, playing most, 2 or 3 times a week at least, but just having something different to talk about every day is I mean, to some degree, a good thing, I would think.
Yeah, and it's very different from like football, where
Mhm.
you there's a game once a week, and you're still covering it on a daily basis, but there's a game once a week,
Right.
as opposed to baseball where you're playing every day. There's news happening every day. There's a result almost every day. Obviously there's some off days in there, but it's like there's something going on. There's roster moves. There's when you talk about basketball, it's like it's a larger roster than basketball, and you don't really have. I mean, I guess nowadays there's more of a feeder system when you talk about G League and things like that, but
Mhm.
you don't have the full farm system like you have in Major League Baseball. You don't have the constant roster changes. You don't have stuff like that. I mean, it's just there's a lot going on, and then um, the game itself. I've had conversations with people where it's like the fact that you've got a game that um, there's so much inherent failure
Mhm.
makes for such at least I think makes for such rich storylines and just sort of scenarios and things that unfold because of that too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably one of the reasons that, and because baseball has always drawn really great writers. Um, maybe because it may be kind of a chicken and egg type of thing, but I feel like that's one of the reasons that there's such this legacy of writing that comes with baseball more than any other sport. I know there are good books and good things, but it feels like baseball and writing have kind of coexisted for their entire career, right? And it's something that stands out more than it does for other sports.
Yeah, and the pace of the game too. I mean,
Mhm,
compared to like so much back and forth and things going on in like a basketball game,
mhm,
whereas it there's a lot of things just that go by in a blink of an eye. Whereas baseball, you can sort of soak in the moments and there's the anticipation is part of it, and
mhm.
sort of the how things are lining up and how things are unfolding is just at a different pace than the sort of the speed of a one play in football or playing basketball. Things just sort of there's a natural lead up
Mhm.
in most things that happen in the baseball game.
So you come over to St. Louis and you're the new guy on the block. Now, granted, you don't have, there's some people that are closer to you. Katie, who's been here up 5 years or so. But then you've got people like Derek Gould that are on the same paper as you are that have been doing this for 20 plus years. What's that dynamic been like for you?
Um, I mean, it's I guess it's like any joining any new um job, or like there's you're meeting new people, you're learning sort of like you're finding out how you interact with certain people versus other people. It's and with baseball, you spend a lot of time around each other. So I mean, it's you know I think I think back to Kansas City, and I think it's probably a little. I've done a little bit better job in St. Louis than in Kansas City as far as um, having people that I spend more time with or hang out with that aren't
Mhm.
directly tied to the
Yeah.
the job and the sport that I cover. But I feel like um, in Kansas City, that was probably a lot larger. The percentage of the people I spent time with was related to that. And I think I've branched out a little bit more in St. Louis, at least so far. But yeah, you spend a lot of time around that small group of people in baseball, just because the season is as long as it is, and you spend as much time at the ballpark, and you're on the road, and so yeah, it's always an interesting thing because it's I think I'm sure in the past I've joked about it being, a traveling circus because we're all sort of like, on the road, in and out of town, going into these different cities, and you also get to develop relationships and things with some of the writer groups in other cities, and then they come into your city, so it's kind of a cool thing. But it's creating a new relationships and things, and of course there's some. I mean, I knew a few of the folks I'd at least met or
Mhm.
spoke to, or had a meal with or something like that, or maybe grabbed a drink with or something like that. So I mean, it wasn't as though I hadn't met any of the folks before, but some it was you knew better than others.
Right. I did see this week you throwing down I don't know if it's a challenge or a jibe at Katie for running in the mornings in the cold versus her running out in Florida. I think you're right. I mean, I love Katie and Katie's been great, but I would not want to be out at 25 running versus 7 o'clock in the morning in 70s.
Yeah, well, we both give each other a hard time because last year, yeah, I think last year was I don't think we did it the year before, but last year, because we both like the thing in spring training is, you're there early, and then once the first part of spring training, there's workouts. There's not really a lot necessarily going on in the afternoon until the games start. So
Mhm.
you have more time in the day, at least in theory, even after you write and everything. But once the games start, you're there until the evening, into the night, and that sort of thing. So like if you're gonna go, at least the way I've found it is, if you're gonna go and like exercise and things like that, you get up early to do it. So I
Mhm.
mean, sometimes that means, you know, 5 in the morning going to the gym or going out for a run or something like that. And so last year, we had a thing where we would sort of check in with each other and make sure we were both staying on schedule with the workouts that we said we were going to do, and make sure, hey, did you actually get up today and run? And so we would text each other back and forth. And so this year I will be going to spring training, but I haven't gone down there yet because of the role change. I'm only going to be down there for about half the time. So I was giving her a little hard time about the fact that she's down there running when the weather's nice, and I'm still up here in St. Louis running with 20. I think it was around 25 or below 25 that day.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah, and trying not to slip on ice or anything of that nature.
yeah,
So,
yeah. So, but yeah, it was that was the sort of an inside joke that I just decided to make semi-public on Twitter.
yeah. So how will the role change? Like you said, you're not going to spring training as you're going, but not for as long. Um, how do you think your role will change during the year? I mean, with traveling and things of that nature.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm gonna travel. I mean, at this point, we haven't really talked about traveling. I mean, I guess
Mhm.
it's I mean, depending on if there's something where they feel like we need to have multiple people there, but at this point, I assume most of it will be Derek Gould and Daniel Guerrero. We'll do road trips. And so I'll probably mostly be there at home games. I mean, I'm not sure. Ben Frederickson would go to winter meetings some years, even though he didn't go this past year. So I'm not sure um, how we're gonna factor that out. If it's going to be both the beat writers, or it's going to be one writer and one columnist. They've done it different ways in different years, so we haven't gotten that far down the line. That's winter meetings, next winter. But I mean, I still plan to be around a good deal, especially when they're at home, press conferences, news events, things like that. Like you said, be down there for every day for about 3 weeks of spring training as opposed to the 6 weeks. So, I mean, it's still going to be a large part of what I do. It's just going to be a part as opposed to, the entire thing.
Right. Yeah. I think that's going to be fun for you, I think, to some degree. It may be more fun to be able to not write about the Cardinals the way the last couple of years have gone. I think, am I right? You came at the beginning of 23.
Yeah. So I was here for 23, 24, and this will be my third season coming up.
So you haven't really gotten a chance to see the best of St. Louis in this whole time period. I mean, it's I'm sure it's been interesting, but maybe not exactly what you thought you were walking into when you came across.
No, it's not. It's not been the high times for Cardinals baseball, but um, you know, it's funny because I covered a lot of minor league baseball in the past. One of the things that I really liked about baseball, or I have liked about baseball, and continue to like, is especially like I say, it comes from the minors, is you see guys who maybe have those early struggles, whether it's a certain level in the minors or with a certain thing, or they get up there for the first time, and then if you're covering on a daily basis, you actually get to see the improvements, and you see them make the strides from the beginning of one season to the next, or from 1 month to the next, or from they struggled at the end of one season and then they're back the next season, and you see them take off. And so, like, that progress that you really only see if you're there every day. I mean, I guess you can track it in box scores and things like that, but you're not really seeing that the things that he wasn't doing, or he wasn't able to do, or wasn't able to catch up to, and then seeing how, whatever the period of time is later, and seeing him doing all of those things, or doing most of those things, like that's been a really cool thing to me, just in covering the game of baseball at whatever level it's been.
Yeah, that is the benefit of following something every day, that you can really see the changes. But then, I mean, you also get a chance as a columnist then to step back and look at the big picture, right? You're not necessarily in tune to that day to day as much, but you get to see a bigger picture that sometimes the beat writers can't see because they're in the weeds so much.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's you don't have to necessarily be so locked into just that day's roster move, or the news of the day. You can look at it from how it's going to fit into a bigger context, or just what that means in the grander scheme, as opposed to just trying to drill down on the details of what happened that day. So yeah, it's definitely a different perspective and a different approach to the baseball season, or it's going to be.
Yeah. So off season was ridiculously quiet. In fact, it feels like maybe there's been more news in the last week than there was since October. Um, what were your just general thoughts on how this off season played out, and was it as you expected?
That actually was that last part right there that you said is exactly where I was going to go. Is like it, I've heard multiple people, whether it's people I've talked to, or if it's a radio show, or television, or whatever it is, and they talk about how they haven't done anything this winter, or they haven't done and I'm like, that was exactly what I expected. I mean, based off of what they said at the end of last season and what we've heard as we went along, I was like, well, with the exception of potentially, trading Nolan Arenado, there wasn't. I would there, I didn't expect a whole lot to happen. I mean, that
Yeah.
was, and that wasn't just, based off of, guessing. And, it was like, no, they were pretty straightforward with, what they were planning to do or not do. So like, that's what I expected. I mean, I did think they would maybe get a trade done, but at this point, as we sit here today, it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems unlikely to happen at all with the Bregman signing this week. So, what do you think that first day is like when Nolan comes into the camp? I guess sometime this weekend. Is it? I mean, maybe I'll just leave it open. Maybe I should just leave it. What do you think that's going to be like?
Yeah, what was funny was I think it was a week or two ago. I wrote a column saying how um, basically I didn't, or the Nolan Arenado showing up at camp isn't going to be the calamity that we probably thought it would have been,
Mhm.
a couple months earlier. And the main reason that I wrote that was because one, at the time that we initially, John Mozeliak initially said that was what they were planning to do, was to trade him. Um, the thought was that they needed to do that for financial reasons, and if they weren't able to do that, then there would probably be ramifications for the roster that meant
Mhm.
getting rid of other guys to make the money work. Now, by the time we got to the winter warm up, Mo and ownership had said that trading him or not trading him wasn't going to necessitate big roster moves to make payroll meet a certain
Mhm.
number. So to me, the fact that not trading Nolan meant that they weren't necessarily going to have to downgrade the roster just to make the money work, was a big part of why, okay, it's not going to be a calamity if he's still there. The other part of that is he neither he nor the organization had really said anything at this point that you couldn't take back, or that you were going to regret, or
Right.
that it was going to
Right.
make it a crazy scenario for him to walk back in. And then also at winter warm up, we heard from at least a couple of players who still were going to be open to having him there. I mean, Lars Nootbaar is one of his closest friends on the team, so obviously Lars and him are real close. But I think without, I think it was mentioned, but it wasn't necessarily asked. Mason Wynn said flat out that he hoped that Nato was going to be back. So I mean, like, it's not like he was going to. You knew it's not like he was going to be a complete pariah. You knew he hadn't said anything that was going to rub everybody the wrong way, at least not publicly. So it wasn't going to be um, one of those things where it was like he was going to be roped off from everybody else, and it was
Yeah.
going to, I mean, and maybe in some, in some cases there may be some friction, but I mean, it wasn't, it's not something that I don't think you can be that can't be overcome, and it's not going to be the first time there's been a guy come back to a clubhouse and there be some friction either.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not common in St. Louis to have the front office talking about trading a player so openly, and then especially for them to then come back. So it's a little bit different from the outside point of view. But you're right. I mean, those to some degree, everybody's professional in there, and I have never heard that he's it's not a cancer in the clubhouse type of situation. It's not a guy that has come out openly and campaigned to be gone like he kind of did in Colorado. So, like you said, no bridges were burned. They might have been, you know, singed a little bit here and there, but for the most part, people can still walk across them. And I think we've always say winning fixes everything. If they come out with a strong month, I think some of that gets put back on the back burner because you're focused on, hey, the team's doing well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the hardest part is just going to fall on Ollie Marmol
Mhm.
trying to work out the playing time situation. But I
Yeah.
mean, to me, it would have been worse if, like, okay, you can't trade him, so then you guys trade starting pitchers, which
Right.
likely brings your entire team down a little bit in terms of, like, what you expect out of your starting rotation, which is a fairly important part of your team.
Mhm.
And then, or
means that you're, maybe you're weakening some other part of your team in order to, cut some payroll. But it's most likely it's going to come for starting pitching. So weakening the starting pitching and keeping Arenado, is not what is going to end up happening, which is probably the most likely scenario, at least what we thought at December if they didn't trade him. So to me, it was like, all right, well, he comes back. The hardest part about that is like, okay, how are you getting at bats? And probably what happens is you lose a little bit defensively, because my suspicion is that the likely scenario is Nolan Gorman would have slid to third base with Nolan Arenado gone. Gorman stays at second base. Donovan goes to left field. Nootbaar probably goes to center field, and you lose defensively because you're probably not getting Ciani and/or Victor Scott in at center field to the type of at bats that you would have liked to get, but you'll still get the at bats for Gorman that they feel like they need to get. You get Nootbaar the at bats that he needs to get. You get Jordan Walker the at bats he needs to get. And you keep Donovan, in the lineup on a regular basis. So, and then also, the first base DH spot stays between Contreras and Burleson. So, it's just a matter of the playing time, which Ollie's got to sort through. And of course, this is all assuming health, which, with some people has never been something you can assume.
No, probably not a good assumption. Somebody's going to get hurt, just don't know when and how long. But yeah, you're right. I think especially when you line out like that, it feels like the only person that might get shorted in the most part. I mean, is Victor Scott second, and he'll probably get regular time at Memphis, which is not a bad thing for him. Yes, Michael Ciani will play less. I'm not sure that I don't rate him as highly as a prospect as maybe the organization does, but I would rather see Lars get the at bats there as long as he can stay out there, and Ciani be a very capable fourth outfielder that comes in in the seventh or eighth inning in a close game if necessary. So yeah, it doesn't feel like this is a huge holdup for the fact that Arenado's back.
No, I mean, it hurts you defensively, but I mean, like if, and the thing that, like I say earlier on in the off season, or I should say maybe in like December, it's like, okay, well, you're if Arenado doesn't get traded, then you have the same log jam or the same playing time thing you got to sort through, but then you're also probably weakening your starting pitching staff, and then the other aspect of that is the whole thing, and like I said, we haven't Nato hasn't come out and said anything that you couldn't take back. His agent spoke at the winter meetings, and I was there for that. And even then, the one thing that he sort of hit on was like Nolan. I think this is where he used the biological clock reference, where he says, it's like a biological clock for winning, and if he's not winning, then it drives him crazy, and it's like, well, the weakening your pitching staff, it seems like that's going to just a recipe for not improving, your chances of winning, and then also, weakening the team. So like that's why it seemed like at the time that it could be a bad situation. But like, okay, you don't have to weaken the pitching staff. You still have the same, playing time thing you got to sort through, but it's not, it's not a crazy scenario. And then if Nolan, plays better, hits for the power they didn't hit for last year, then, not only does that improve the Cardinals, then probably improves the chances of, somebody coming to get them in the trade.
Yeah. And then you come into that, bit of a catch-22. If the Cardinals are playing well enough, do they really want to trade him and maybe run the risk of, sabotaging a little bit of what they might have this year? I would love that to be a problem. I would love them to get to the trade and have to worry about not being able to trade them because they're doing too well. But we'll have to wait and see if that pans out. You've talked about the pitching in the starting rotation, especially. Is there any? Do you find it at all a conflict between letting the young guys play, letting like having a McGreevy or maybe a Roberta or something like that in the rotation versus what looks like right now, Miles Michaelis and Steven Matz at the back of the rotation?
To me, it's, and I think, I don't know, I guess it's probably my preference, and some of it may again be from time that I spent covering minors and things like that. But like,
Mhm.
I'm not one who's like, okay, we got to rush to get these guys up here. So I mean, like to me, it would be one thing if guys were, you know, had a long time in the minors, had already demonstrated. But I mean, like people want to rush to, well, we'll stick with the guys because I was going to say, like people who want to rush for Quinn Matthews. It's like, well, he
Mhm.
jumped four levels in 1 year, so I mean,
Right.
like we can give him a little bit of time. But you didn't mention Matthews, so I won't. We'll go to the ones that you mentioned. So it's like McGreevy. It's like okay, like McGreevy, like, you can make a case for McGreevy. At the same time, it's like I don't know that you're setting him back. And also the fact that, I mean, we're going to see him at some point
Yeah.
because the next time that a team puts five starters in the rotation and goes from start to finish with those five, I think will be the first time that I've seen it.
Mhm.
So you're going to see him at some point because he's on deck, or at least he seems like he's
Right.
on deck. So we'll see him at some point. So I don't think it's setting him back. And then also, I mean, for the exciting and impressive outings that we saw, it's also is a small sample size. So
Right.
it's not, I don't think it's one of those things where it's like, oh, they're holding them back, they're setting them back, or that it's crazy to think that if he goes to the minors that it's like malpractice or anything. It's like
Mhm.
no, he I mean, and he finished strong, but I mean there was a point early last year where his production in the minors was sort of looking a little like, So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh yeah.
so it's not crazy to think, oh well, he might start this year in the minors. I mean, that's to me that's not crazy. I mean, I guess again for me it's like that's not crazy at all. Now, I guess if your mindset is well, no, we're going to put all the young guys out there and just but I don't think. I think that's why there's that the whether you want to call it semantics or whatever
Mhm.
the distinction between rebuild and the reset. Like if they were doing rebuild and you were just saying we're going to put all the young guys out there and we might lose 100 games and that's just going to be what it is, then
Yeah.
then that's different. But that's not. I don't think the way they've been trying to approach it, and in that case, you say, well, in a full rebuild, you say, well, we're just going to take the lumps, and guys might not be ready, but we're going to get them out there, and they're just going to, learn on the job, and this will be really about the 2 or 3 years from now, as opposed to what actually happens this year. But that's not really the way they've been going about it, or they've been presenting it at this point.
Well, and there's also the case, if you depending on how you look at it, is that the Cardinals of the past have tried to chase basically every win, right? And that want to win 83, 84, 85, 88 games, whatever the case would be. And they've said that that's not going to be the focus this year. Well, that also, not only does that mean that you could start a young guy in the majors and not worry about the wins, it also means you can start a young guy at AAA and not worry about having to rush him up because the team is struggling or anything like that. I think that's where the development issue is going to be very interesting to see if they just keep people in the minors longer, knowing that maybe they can help the Cardinals today, but they can help them more, months from now or years from now if they can get the time in AAA or AA.
Yeah, and I think if the focus is on getting these guys to a point where not just they can fill a need, but like when they're get them to a point where they're ready, then I think that could be two different things. I think that's what you're talking about is like
Mhm.
the filling a need versus they're ready to step in and play the role that you sort of have projected for them. Then you focus on okay, we're going to make sure that these guys are ready to do what we feel like they can do at this level, and then you bring them up when they're ready. It doesn't matter the need. It doesn't matter that oh, you got 5 spots to fill in the rotation, and traded away the veteran guys, so somebody's got to fill those spots. Like no,
Mhm.
you keep them at the level that you want them at until you feel like they've accomplished what you want them to accomplish, and they've shown you what they need to show you that they're ready. Then there's nothing wrong with that, at least to me. um, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And also if that means that the guy comes up and is in the rotation as opposed to we're going to bring him up and he's going to be in the bullpen so that he can sort of get his feet wet. It's like, well, I mean, I know that's happened before, and I know that and the Cardinals have had plenty of guys had success with that. But I also know I look at like a team like Seattle, and their rotation is maybe one of the best as far as just guys taking the ball and consistent performance in the majors right now. Those guys almost all have come up as starters and started when they got to the majors and started all the way through. It wasn't we're going to put you in the bullpen and ease you into the rotation. It was like, no, they were starters in the minors, and when they came up, they've been starters.
Yeah. And we've seen in the past, the Cardinals put guys in the bullpen and never get them out, right? I mean, Ryan Helsley is a good indication of that. A guy that started it was a starter all the way up till he came to St. Louis and has never been able to get out of that role. Now, obviously, he's taken to the closer role very well. If you were going to look at this, if you could jump forward to the end of the season, how different do you think the roster is on October 1st than it is on opening day?
That's an interesting question. I mean, if I'm sitting here now, I mean, I guess my suspicion, especially since it could happen anytime between now and the trade deadline, is like my first guess is that maybe Arenado's not part of the club anymore. I wonder about some of the pitchers because maybe as you get to the point where you feel like starting pitchers, I'm thinking of where you think McGreevy or somebody else is ready to take on that role. Maybe that becomes the impetus to move somebody else, whether that's Matz or Michaelis or somebody or So I wonder if you get one or two of those young starters into the rotation on a regular basis. I wonder if Arenado's gone at that point, and then based on who stays healthy and what performance looks like. I mean, I wonder who maybe looks like odd man out on playing time is maybe a regular. I mean, like a Thomas Sajaci. Like I don't see where the everyday at bats are coming from right now, but maybe by the end of the season, like is there a spot where he's getting regular looks? I don't know if it's for your question, I'm not sure if it's a full like big change in the roster as much as it is roles, whether guys are taking on bigger roles, if guys are doing something different than what we're penciling them in to do right now. So I think that's the interesting part. I hadn't really thought of it until you said it, but yeah, I think that to me would be where my mind goes right away.
Yeah, that does make sense. You're right, because I mean, there could be easily be people that play themselves into bigger roles or play themselves into smaller ones. And when you look at this team, I mean, there's a lot of interesting talent, but there's a lot of people that I feel like this is the season they have to do something. They don't have to be, all-star or anything like that, but they have to make some very, very solid steps forward. Out of Nootbaar, Walker, Gorman, maybe even Burleson, who do you think has to have the best year?
I would say Nootbaar. I think in my head thinking you named Walker, Gorman, Nootbaar, Burleson. Burleson, I think at least and he's shown it for a full season last year. He trailed off at the end, but I mean that was also the first season he got everyday playing time. And I think now if he takes a step back this year, then that probably puts a different perspective on how you look at things going forward or what you have to see from him the following year. But I think Lars, because he's been around as much as he has, because he's hasn't stayed healthy, because for multiple reasons, I think he's the one that I hone in on and say you want to see it, because I feel like there's a lot of things that you look at with him and you can see what it could be. I mean, and I know some people don't like the metrics and things like that, but I mean, I don't know. To me, for what he's done in stretches, from his plate discipline, the power, the left-handedness, the combinations. I mean, to me, and this is just me saying this. I mean, Well, the one that I've heard, that I don't know, I'm not sure that I agree with, is like, the one that I've heard people say is like, potentially like a Yelich type. To
Mm,
me, the thing that I land on is more like something between this. Maybe just because I've seen one of these guys, in person for a period of time, but it was like something in between, like a Nimmo and a Kyle Tucker.
mm,
And so, and Nimmo, I covered in the minors and I've sort of followed for some years. And Tucker, I think, some people underrate him, but that's one of the, you know, probably top 10, 15 players in baseball
mhm,
if you actually take a deep dive at it. But I mean, profile wise, to me, I think, if we ever saw it over a full season and stayed healthy and performed the way people think he can perform, you know, it's something in between there is what I think, Lars can give you. We just haven't seen it. And if you have another season where you don't see it, then maybe if you're the Cardinals, you decide you're not going to see it,
mhm.
and you and
Right.
you change gears.
Right. Yeah, and then that's kind of my thinking on, because if I was going to pick, I'd say Gorman, and some of the same reasoning, right? I mean, he's got so much potential, and if he can harness it like he did even just a couple of years ago, then I think okay, you're on the right path and everything like that. But if not, you're starting to get into the arbitration years. And you start wondering, do is it a situation where you trade him before he loses all value? I mean, I think there's a lot on him, and I hope none of these guys. I mean, I'm sure these guys have that in the back of their head, but I also hope this idea of the reset helps keep some of that pressure off of them so they can go out and play and not have to worry about what things are going to be like at the end of the year. They can just get out there and play and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, you could make the case for Gorman. I think to me, like the fact that Lars is already into the arbitration years
Yeah.
and he's been around as long as he has, and the health thing just
Hmm.
seems to be an ongoing thing. Where I mean, and Gorman's had the back thing is cropped up at times, but I mean, it hasn't been and as extensive as what we've seen with Lars, and plus like you have seen a full season of Gorman, and I mean 2023, he I mean and he made the adjustment with getting pitches at the top of the zone, and I mean like
Right.
that he looked pretty good in 2023. I mean
Hmm.
like a left-handed um, power bat that also can play the middle infield. I mean, I think ideally, depending on what goes on with Arenado, he slides over to third base. But either way, like that's that. I think there's something there, and I mean, he's also, I think Gorman now. I'm looking up real quick. I want to say he's turned 24 this year.
We should
He
be
did turn
25.
24. Yeah, he
Yeah.
did turn
Yeah.
24 already. So yeah, he'll turn 25 this year. So you got a
Hmm.
couple years difference between him and Lars, because Lars is 27 right now.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I think, and at least in my mind, I guess it depends on how fast you think some guys are going to move. But I mean, I think you have more. Maybe depend on. Yeah, I guess we could debate it. If you got more
Hmm.
options, feel like you might have more options in the outfield that maybe, um, you know, uh, pressing up against it as opposed to, um, second base or third base right now at least.
Yeah, I guess it depends on how fast JJ Weatherholt moves this year, and what they do want to do with Thomas JC, and of course if Nolan Arenado is here for any length of time, like you said, once you take that big piece off the playing board, then it does free up a few different options. But yeah, I mean, and all these guys have something to prove this year. I mean, even Jordan Walker, who has the pedigree, and I don't think, nobody's ready to give up on him yet, but he still has something to prove going into this season.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think they all have something to prove. I
Mhm.
think if the I mean, yeah, you could. I mean, they all have something to prove. I think, but just as far as who's closer to
Right.
sort of a tipping point, to me, it's Lars. But I mean, it's been interesting to me that going back to winter meetings, um, it's been pretty clear, and even by name, from all the way up to John Mozeliak, the names, the three names they've sort of said flat out, we need to find out if they can be what we think they can be. There's been Lars Nootbaar, Nolan Gorman, Jordan Walker. So
Yep.
the fact that they've been as upfront and clear about that was kind of an interesting thing to me. I mean, I think everybody sort of knew it. I mean, everybody, you look at it and what they've been, what they've shown, what they've been projected to be, and all that. I mean, but the fact that it's, for them to come out and say, yeah, this is, we need to find out if these three can produce the way we think they can produce. It's like, all right, well, they're sort of putting the spotlight right on them.
Yeah, and they have. So what do you think you're looking for the most? Not only when you get to spring training and be able to see them, but maybe as a line throughout the season.
Well, those three is
Mhm.
high up on the list. Like, what are those three able to do? Are they going to be able to sort of make a case one way or the other for their place in the future for this team? I mean, I think those three as a unit and individually is near the top, if not at the top. So that's one. Shoot, there's a lot of them. I mean, there's if especially throughout the season. I'm interested to see what the sort of follow up years for Mason Wynn and Alec Burleson look like, because they were, for a good chunk of last season, your two most consistent of the young guys who were stepped into new roles, and for periods where we're carrying the offense, as the offensive catalyst, the two of them, and then trailed off towards the end. So what does this year look like for them? How do they sort of follow that up? Wilson Contreras at first base, I think, is a huge one.
Yeah.
Both the transition and also what that means for what he's able to give them, because I think him being healthy and him taking to that first base role can be a real big difference maker for their lineup, because he was, when he was healthy last year, but he only played 84 games, but when he was healthy, was the best hitter they had in that lineup. I don't think it was really all that particularly close either. So if he can give you a full season and he can still produce like that, and maybe produce more, but I mean, that's maybe, getting a little pie in the sky there. But if he can produce a similar level than what he did, not so much, take another step forward, but just even produce similar to that on a more full basis, then that's a big difference for them. And also just the fact that he, really seems to really want to be there, and not so much as from a production standpoint, but just from a as it goes through over the course of the season, to see how much of a leadership role I think he takes on, because I think that's in the cards. I mean, you don't know, and it's hard to tell, but I feel like that he could be a real sort of driving force, especially with those young guys. And he's a fiery dude. He plays with a lot of motion. Sometimes it can tip to the point where it's maybe too much emotion. But I think there's guys in there that can feed off of that and will feed off of that if he gets going. And so I think that's going to be an interesting thing to see how that develops and how that goes. And if that turns into something that where he becomes a sort of a leader for this club, and guys feed off of him, and they go as he goes, and you see a lot of that fire sort of be contagious among some of those guys. And I think guys like Wynn and Gorman and some of those guys, I could see them being guys that his fire sort of sparks something in them too. But that's sort of a lot of speculating and conjecture on my part, but I think that'd be an interesting thing to see how that does or doesn't unfold during the season.
Well, spring is for speculating, so that's perfectly fine. Are you a little bit? I'm sorry, but I wanted to, while we're still on Contreras, were you a little surprised that he was so adamant about staying? I mean, it's he's not had the winning track record here in St. Louis like he probably expected to get. And then there was the whole, the whole thing in 23 kind of getting thrown under the bus. And I guess I was a little bit surprised that he might not have said, hey, maybe I'm going to take this out clause.
I mean, a little bit surprised, but also I think that's, to me, that's part of what makes it so interesting too, is that he comes here in following in the footsteps of Yadier Molina, and then a month into his first season sort of gets thrown under the bus and
Yeah.
he wore it, and he took it and he wore it, and he pushed forward. And I mean, and the timing couldn't have been worse, considering that, like, all that sort of unfolded right on the cusp of him going back to Chicago for the first time. And so that just, I mean, it was something else. But then by the end of that season, the to see the emotion, particularly with Wayno's pursuit of 200 and the role he played, because I remember being in Baltimore and Wayno got 199, and Contreras was catching him for that one, and Contreras was banged up, and I think to the point where I'm pretty sure in the Baltimore game he came out of the game when Wayno came out of the game, because he was banged up to a point of, like, he was gutting it out, and they left him in there as long as Wayno was in there. And then he came out, and then he came back for 200 and caught 200, and he was maybe as emotional, if not more emotional, than Wayno after that game. So I think all of this makes it just an interesting dynamic to me. And then for him to go and put in the time that he did to try and to completely change the way he was working behind the plate with his setup and everything else, and to look like he had really transformed, and then get hurt and have the fits and starts last year with two different broken bones. I mean, I'm not sure, if I were in his position, how I would react. I mean, it's hard to say. Would you just want a fresh start and a clean slate and say the heck with this, or would you say you've been through that much, you want to see it through? But he was really passionate talking about the first time at winter warm up, and so that's what, again, to me, it's really interesting. I'm not sure how surprised. I mean, I guess I am, but at the same time, I don't even really necessarily think of it in context of surprise. I just feel like it's a cool storyline to track and see where this thing goes.
Yeah. And I mean, and again, to want to stay enough that you get off the position that you've been at your whole entire career, in part because there are young guys coming that need the chance to play. It's pretty remarkable. I mean, I kind of expected Sunday Greatest Day, I think, partly because of location and things of that nature have been so were such a big part of how he got to St. Louis, of being close to home. But I was very surprised by Contreras, and I think it only endears him even more to the fan base to make that kind of commitment to St. Louis.
Yeah, and then also just for him to finish up the way the season the way he did in terms of being on the IL, but like the comments he made at the end of the season, after the final home game, I mean, he wasn't obviously he was on the IL, wasn't playing, but for him to basically point a finger at the front office, and I'm pretty sure it was, if I remember it correctly, because I was there and I asked the question, which was, talking about going into next season. And the question, as I remember it, was, do you feel like you guys have enough right now, and just, if you make improvements and play better, or do you need more? Do you need to get some outside help? And he started talking about, he says, well, and I don't have it in front of me, but it was something to the effect of, this division is there, and if I was the front office, I would want to take a hold of this division. I'd want to claim this division. I'd want to own this division, and I hope that's what the front office does, but I'm not sure. It was something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but like for him to say that at the end of the season, putting the onus directly on the front office to do what they need to do to make this team better, to make them contend in the division. not only was that newsworthy, but it's like I wonder too, like when you come out and say that, can you ask out? I mean, can you come out and say that and then say, well, trade me? I mean, I mean, obviously we have his answer. His answer
Yeah.
was no. You got to
Right.
stay and see this thing through. But yeah, it's interesting. But and you mentioned, and actually, you mentioned the him moving off to get younger guys in. That was another thing that I was that I'm looking forward to this year. Just seeing how it unfolds is the with Herrera and Pajes, particularly
Yeah.
Herrera, in terms of if he gets an extended period, how does his catching improve defensively, and how does his offense hold up over the course of the season? Because he's from an offensive standpoint, I mean, he can be, I think a one of those catchers you don't see a lot of in terms of what he's able to provide you offensively. And then the question obviously is like, okay, can he make the needed strides defensively to make that a worthwhile combination? But yeah, that's something I'm really interested in seeing this season as well.
Well, and then I think, well, as I would say, all eyes are on that position, but I think one eye is also going to then be at Memphis because of seeing what Jimmy Crooks can do, right? I mean, is there going to be that push? I mean, he's probably got a whole year down there, but still, is there going to be that kind of that crunch of somewhere somebody, you can't carry three young catchers. What's going to happen in that regard, I think could be very interesting. Now, I mean, like you said, Chris could get off to a slow start, kind of make all that moot. But if he plays in line with what he did last year, it may not matter for the 2025 season, but it really may make a difference for the 2025 off season.
Yeah, I mean potentially. I mean, but then again, that's we're assuming that that he goes through this season and does similar to what he's done in the past.
Sure.
I mean, it's one of those things that I've heard many baseball folks say is development isn't necessarily linear, and
Right.
having watched a lot of minor leagues and seen guys, it's like, yeah, you don't know. I mean, like, you don't know what it's going to look like from one year to the next. And even when you think, something happens, injury or, just a slump or, there's, you change something because you're trying to get a guy more ready for down the line. And then it sets something else back. I mean, it is all just, random things that happen. So you don't know. And then also it's, the other side of that is like, and if everything goes the way it's gone, then it's like, okay, well, that's the problem you want to have,
Right.
I remember, Dayton Moore, when he was still in charge of the Royals, used to say about catchers. He's like, you can never have enough catchers. He's like, people say it about pitching. He said, but you can never have enough catchers. He said, and then I think his line was, he said he used to say he feels like there's fewer, quality or starting caliber catchers in Major League Baseball, or fewer than you need in comparison to quarterbacks in the NFL. He's like, it's easier to find a quarterback that you can plug in than it is to find a catcher that you roll with every day. And so like catching was one of those things that he always felt like, you could never have enough of. I remember talking to some folks back years ago, and I think it was the Blue Jays system where they always, or at least at the time, they wanted to have a guy that they thought was a potential big league catcher at every level, at least one at every level. And at the time, Travis d'Arnaud was the star of their farm system, but they had some guys who looked like they had the potential to be guys in the big leagues at some point, at somebody at single A, somebody at double A, somebody at triple A. It's like, so catching, I mean, if you've got multiple guys who can potentially be big league catchers, that's not a problem.
No. And thankfully the Cardinals do seem to have been able to develop catchers. They've developed them for so long they had to give a lot of them away because Yadier Molina stayed so long. But that has been something. And again, you're right. You're going to need them somewhere along the way. So yeah, it is going to be an interesting year. and I look forward to seeing how it all pans out. And we look forward to seeing how you're going to cover it as well. So you said what, a couple weeks before you head down to Jupiter?
Yeah, basically the beginning of March, or from like March 2nd through the end of camp, I'm going to be down there. So yeah, I'll have a good about 3 week stretch to see how things finish up down in Jupiter. So as the roster decisions are being made, and we're getting to the point where you're really starting to see the team take shape. That's when I'll be down there, and I'll as we referenced earlier, I'll be trying to log some of those soft Florida miles as opposed to the cold miles up here.
That's right. Yeah, I was going to say, hopefully you can stay warm until then. If the weather's like it, I think next week's going to be pretty yucky. So hopefully you'll survive that, though. So, Lynn, I appreciate you joining me. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a great talking to you.
Yeah. We have gone through our media types. I have tried to get them out of the way so they can get down to Jupiter. So next week we'll have Jason Hill, formerly of Viva Alberto's, to come on with me. But until then, for Lynn, I'm Daniel. Good night.
Alisea, the second for one, the double play. What a double play by Ozzie Smith. Oh, mercy.
Hi, everyone. Rich Bray here, and today I'm taking a look back at the trade that made Ozzie Smith a St. Louis Cardinal. In December 1981, the Cardinals and Padres agreed to trade shortstops, sending Ozzie Smith to St. Louis and Gary Templeton to San Diego. Both players had worn out their welcome in their current organizations. Templeton had famously grabbed his crotch and flipped the bird at fans at Busch Stadium, an incident he later said was sparked by racist remarks directed to him from fans near the Cardinals' dugout. In San Diego, Ozzie and the Padres had been feuding over his salary for years. In 1980, Ozzie and the Padres were unable to agree to a contract, and according to the rules at the time, the Padres simply renewed Ozzie's contract for $72,500, the same amount he had earned the previous year. That spring, Ozzie told reporters that he may need to take a second job to make ends meet, and later his agent took out a classified ad in the San Diego newspaper indicating that Ozzie would be willing to quit baseball for the right job opportunity. If Ozzie's agent thought that would embarrass the Padres, however, the joke ultimately proved to be on Ozzie when Joan Kroc, the wife of the Padres owner, publicly offered Ozzie a part-time job as an assistant gardener at her estate. After Ozzie and the Padres agreed to a $300,000 contract in 1981, San Diego approached Ozzie's agent and asked him to propose a long-term contract. Ozzie's side responded by asking for a 25-year contract that would pay him $1 million per year through his age 51 season. At this point, the Padres didn't feel like Ozzie was a reasonable negotiating partner, and they were ready to cut ties. At the winter meetings in December 1981, Padres manager Jack McKeon found Whitey Herzog, and the two agreed to a trade. However, things became complicated when the Padres realized that Ozzie's last contract included a no-trade clause, and though the season had ended, that clause remained in effect. When the Padres asked Ozzie to waive his no-trade clause, Ozzie countered by asking them to buy it out. The Padres weren't interested. Instead, the Cardinals were given permission to negotiate directly with Ozzie. The day after Christmas, Herzog visited Ozzie in California. There, he told him that he believed Ozzie was the missing piece to their championship hopes and offered him a $450,000 contract. Whitey told the shortstop that if he didn't like it in St. Louis, they would grant him his release after the season. If he did like it, they would be willing to give him a 3-year contract. Nonetheless, Ozzie remained unconvinced. He wanted $750,000 per year, which would pay him more than what St. Louis had been paying Gary Templeton. Instead, Herzog told Ozzie that if he approved the trade, the Cardinals would be willing to determine his 1982 salary through an arbitrator. Finally, on February 11, 1982, the deal was completed. Though years on Busch Stadium's artificial turf had ravaged Templeton's knees, he went on to play 10 seasons in San Diego, helping the Padres win the NL pennant in 1984. Sixto Lezcano, the other player sent to San Diego in the deal, hit .289 with 16 homers and 84 RBIs in 1982 before the Padres traded him to the Phillies the following season. Meanwhile, 8 months after the trade was completed, Ozzie and the Cardinals were celebrating the 1982 World Series championship. With 13 Gold Gloves, 15 All-Star games, and 2,460 hits over his career, Ozzie was the face of the Cardinals franchise for the 1980s, and he became a first-ballot Hall of Famer in 2002. So that's a quick look at how Ozzie Smith became a St. Louis Cardinal. For more Cardinals history, visit stlredbirds.com or follow me on Twitter at Remembirds, REMEMBIRDS. And thanks again, and go Cards.
Suter from the belt to the plate. A swing and a miss, and that's a winner! That's a winner! A World Series winner for the Cardinals!